So let's continue this part of the lecture. We're focused on the progressives, which you read a bit of in the textbook that we have by Vicky Ruiz. So it complements what the chapter was talking about. So I'm going to address here in kind of like in a general way the concept of the progressivism and also the Americanization programs that they had, not only in the Southwest, but also throughout the United States, because it all kind of follows the same model. And we'll see how, if you read the article, you notice how in the end it's not very successful. So who were the progressives? Let's begin there, right? So Mexican Americans are migrating into these urban centers like Los Angeles, El Paso, as the chapter talks about. And for many Americans, obviously you have some nativist group that just hate them, but then you also have another group who says, well, they're here, let's try to help them out. And that's what you see in the chapter, right? Where they implement certain programs to try to help the different population. So the progressives, it's a kind of umbrella term to address many movements within it. So there are many branches to progressivism. An example would be like, your food, that it's not going to kill you for the most part because it's checked, right, by the, I think it's the FDA or somebody, right? So all these kind of programs come out of the progressive era, things that are supposed to benefit society. And, they do a lot of good. But sometimes they didn't. So the progressives, they're part of a middle class at the turn of the century who feel like, America is kind of getting worse by industrialism. People are getting killed in their job, which is, nobody wants to die doing their job. People have bad wages. Again, there's food quality issues. There's a time where they used to ground up bad meat and sell it as, kind of like hamburger patties, ground beef. And they used to put a poison in it that used to kill you, right? Another example would be, this is a good one, where women used to make watches, and they used to paint the numbers on the watch. So they would use a really fine point brush, and they used to put the brush in this liquid and then put it in their mouth to make it really fine, and then paint the number. This contained poison that used to cause cancer and kill many of these poor women. It was a long, horrible death. And, progressives kind of looked into this and said, we need to outlaw this product because it's killing people. Another example would be the Triangle Shirtwaist Company, where they had no fire escapes, and, all these people, I think like 150 people died, again, at a workplace. So the progressives were there to fix those problems because obviously industry, they didn't care about the working class. They're just going to use them up. And, with all this influx of labor, you just hire another one. They're very bureaucratic. A lot of them know how the political system works. A lot of times people get angry for whatever reasons, right? Whatever political view you might have. And we have all this anger, but we don't know how to channel it, right? We don't know what to do with it because we feel like there's so much bureaucracy. Well, everything's a process, right? In order to address your grievances, there's a certain process. And these people knew how the bureaucratic system worked, where it was efficient to actually create real social change. They were professional. Many of them, again, came from the middle class. They're educated, and they're very well connected. A lot of them are from the East Coast also. So yeah, they know how things work. They have college educations too. And they are WASP. Most of them tend to be white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And that you see in the article where the organization, Houchin House, right, tries to convert them into Protestants. So a lot of them tend to be these kind of white Anglo-Saxon people. And what you see in these kind of Americanization programs is that they're trying to make these different ethnic groups into Americans, but into their type of American, right? So they got a very, that's what makes them a little bit racist because, they got a very kind of tunnel vision as to what they consider to be American. So one of the best examples that we have where actually Mexican Americans were located, as I mentioned earlier, many Mexican Americans end up in the Midwest. places like Chicago. One of the most important places like Houchin House, this is really the one that kind of starts it all off, is Whole House. At least starts it off in the United States. So Whole House is in Chicago, and Mexican people did participate in the Americanization programs there. And most of the people who helped in these programs were mostly Anglo-American women. A lot of them were educated, and they were going to college. At this time, you have to understand that women had very limited opportunities. They could be a teacher or they could be a wife, right? So there's really no demand for their labor, particularly if they're educated. You have a college degree, well, you could be a teacher, because that kind of goes along with the idea of what we call Republican motherhood, right? You're still taking care of little kids, except that you're getting paid for it and it's out of school. But these women wanted more out of life. So they saw a problem in society, which was, all these immigrants coming in and they're not Americanized and so forth. And there's, certain problems in some of these poor communities. So they feel like they can address these issues. So in Chicago, they actually established the first social work program in the United States at the University of Chicago. And you have the name there, right? The School of Social Service Administration. So social work didn't even exist until these women created it, basically. So I think they created like pamphlets and books, and they went to conferences. So they basically created a job for themselves that they kind of owned for the most part. It's kind of women only type of organization, not on purpose. It's just that they were the ones who saw this issue and participated in it. And when they came to developing programs to help Americanize these immigrants, the question is then, what are we going to Americanize them into, right? And the question that they ask is, well, what is America? Even today, if I were to ask you, what is America? What does it mean to be American? And many of us feel like, well, I know what American is. I'm an American. Well, yeah, but no, right? I mean, there is, we kind of struggle with that idea. And I think the easy answer out is like, well, we're all unique. And that's not a real answer, right? That's just too bland. There are certain cultural characteristics that define Americans. And that's what this generation's kind of struggling with. Just a bit of quick side note, when I went to Europe, I was in Spain, and I think I was at this hostel, and I was with a white friend because we went together, and they asked where we were from, and I'm like, oh, from Santa Barbara, California. And they asked my friend, we're from the same place. And then they're all, well, you don't look like Californians, because we didn't have the what do you call it, the blonde hair and the kind of Baywatch look at that time, popular show back in the 90s. And we just started laughing because in their mind, they have a perception of what America is. And this is exactly what we're seeing here. They have a perception, these people have a perception what America is. And it's based from their lens, this kind of bourgeois perspective, middle class perspective. So they come up with two models. They start off with what's called the Anglo-Saxon culture and political tradition, kind of modeling ourselves based off English traditions, right? The concepts of democracy, the idea that we speak English, those type of traditions. That's how they define American. We're going to make these Italians, these Mexicans, these Germans into good old Anglo-Saxons, right? Make them eat sandwiches and things like that. And then the second model that they had was a cosmopolitan. And there's a reason why this one comes a little bit later. So the Anglo-Saxon starts during the early period of development of Whole House. And then by about 1915, this other one takes over, and there's a reason why. And again, you read about it in Houchin House. You don't notice it because it's not explicit, but you see it as you're reading that chapter. I'll explain it in a minute. So they wanted these immigrants to assimilate. They wanted them to completely let go of their culture, their Italian, stop eating spaghetti and pizza, and if you're German, stop eating hot dogs and speaking German. If you're Mexican, don't eat tacos anymore. Don't stop speaking Spanish, stop being Catholic, right? They kind of wanted to have you completely let go of this idea because this is what's holding you back. And this definition here kind of articulates that notion that a lot of times when immigrants come in, they have this ethnic solidarity, right? They all kind of group together. But eventually, the goal of this organization was to help you get out of this condition, which they consider kind of like a poor condition, move you up to another step right above that, and help you get Americanized, right? And then at the end, eventually, the final stage was the disappearance of ethnic affiliation. So eventually, you would completely let go of that culture, your traditional culture, I guess, your family culture. And for some groups, it worked. I mean, some people wanted to participate in that and completely let go of, their language and their culture and their traditions and things like that. And they take up this new one called American, right? Modeling themselves after these progressives. And they held a lot of like classes, teaching them how to cook, teaching them, and you read all this, right? I mean, the chapter talks about these type of ideas, right? How to clean. Obviously, religion is a major element of that too. And what we find is that as they're trying to implement these programs, they try to be a community center in places like Chicago, in places like El Paso and Los Angeles. So they practice these concepts called segregation within integration. And what they do is that they have certain meeting times for all the Greeks and all the certain meeting times for the Italians, for the Mexicans, so they can all come together and learn these new traditions, American traditions. And what we find is that, as even the chapter notes, right, not a lot of people participated. We find that on average, when you look at this period, only about 3% of the local population participated, which means 97% did not, right? Most of the people did not want to participate. We find that the people that did participate tended to be women, right? Men wanted nothing to do with it. It's just they didn't care about Americanization again, and they have their own culture. Remember that the mutual aid societies are there, mostly men, so they have their own organizations that they can fall back on. In the end, we find that places like Cole House or Houchin House completely fail, right? They did have some impact, and the reading talks about that agency where you have some immigrant people who wanted to participate in some of these projects, right? And even then, they were very selective. It's like, well, I'll do this, but not that. Oh, my kid's sick. Well, I'll take him to the hospital, but the hell, I'm not going to go take any of these classes. So you see that they really don't become very influential. And the funny thing, too, that you see happening here is the way these ethnic communities begin to impact these organizations, right? We find that the majority of immigrants have their own ethnic institutions. Why am I going to try to be white, right? When I have my own community centers, right? My mutual aid society. So we find that the majority of migrants did not participate in any of this. So in the end, they only really get those people that wanted to participate. and like I said, it's a very small percentage, about 3%. So by 1915, they kind of give up on this idea of trying to make people Anglo-Saxon, and instead they developed this concept called cultural pluralism, which is that cosmopolitan argument that I mentioned earlier. And instead of trying to make them, the kind of full-fledged Americans, they said, well, what if we just kind of have, let them keep some of their culture, but also try to teach them some qualities that might be helpful. And this is what we call the melting pot theory, right? And it's funny because if you finish the chapter, you see how in the end, I think by the 40s or 50s, the Houchin House becomes very Mexican. So in the end, we end up changing them, right? Instead of the other way around. So, these institutions had good intentions, maybe. Again, a little bit racist at times, trying to force these beliefs onto people that didn't really want them. But in the end, we changed them, right? So I'm going to stop it right there. And we'll continue by looking into the 1920s. You have another article by, I think it's Davis Sanchez, that looks at a bit of a transitional period. As I said earlier, the immigrant generation is about 1900 to 1930. Here we look at the 1920s, both with Vicky Ruiz and George Sanchez. That's who it is, not David John Sanchez. George Sanchez's article, Becoming Mexican American. And I'll address that article to show you how we begin to see a transition from the immigrant generation to what now has become the Mexican American generation.